If you score high on all 3 doshas, the common question is, I'm out of balance in all 3 doshas. Which one should I focus on? The answer is focus on ama first. You won't be able to change the doshas until you reduce the ama. So in Ayurveda, it means you want to convert the situation from sama, which means with ama, to nirama, meaning without ama. So if you have vata sama, you want to convert it to vata nirama. Okay? So how do we do it? Well, one thing that we'd love to do is to simplify the diet. What we call it our ama pacifying or ama reducing diet. Very simple. You can remember it. Rice, dal, and vegetables. Rice, dal, and vegetables. So when someone is really toxic, let's say they've been severely abusing themselves with drugs and alcohol, or they've just gone through a really brutal chemotherapy program, or major surgery, or a big emotional turmoil, and they're just feeling dull and heavy and depressed, their digestion is off, their tongue is bad, then what you want to do is for a period of even sometimes a couple weeks, put them on a very simplified diet. Make it easy for their agni to digest what they need to digest. And the simplest things are rice, dal, mostly mung dal, and simple steamed vegetables. Then introduce some of the spices that we talked about. First the warming spices, then the hotter spices. Keep it very simple and have them practice the bits so that whatever they're eating, their body's able to metabolize. What happens then is as the agni increases, it doesn't have to spend its energy digesting the chocolate cheesecake, but it can start digesting the accumulated ama. Now there are herbs that are useful to digest ama. Bitter herbs and pungent herbs. Bitter herbs are said to dry up the ama, and then the pungent herbs actually burn up the ama. So bitter herbs are mostly medicinal herbs. Aloe vera is a bitter herb that's widely available in the United States, and drinking aloe vera juice is something that we recommend commonly. The common Ayurvedic bitter herb is echinacea, which is quite bitter and has an ama-reducing effect. Echinacea. Every health food store promotes echinacea now for colds and flus. In Ayurveda, the bitter herbs, there's actually a whole formula called Mahatikta, which means great bitters. But the important ones are neem, which the Latin is Azadirachta indica. And there's a list of, I think, 20 or 25 Ayurvedic herbs at the back of your syllabus that goes over these. Neem is a very useful herb. It's available in most Indian food stores. And it's very bitter, and it has that effect of cleansing the system. The other one is Mangista. Mangista, the Latin is Rubia cordifolia. And that also is very cleansing to the system. So anything that's bitter, though, any bitter herb will have that effect of drying out the ama, because the bitter is composed of what 2 tastes? What 2 elements? Air and space. So it's drying. It will dry out the ama, which is thick and mushy and foul. And then what you want to do is cook it with pungent herbs. So ginger, cayenne, black pepper, spicy herbs, cloves, cinnamon. These are pungent herbs that will help to digest the ama. So next time you find yourself getting a cold, take some bitter herbs for a day. Drink some aloe vera juice. And then take a lot of pungent herbs. And you'll find yourself getting through that upper respiratory infection much more quickly. The other thing that's useful is liquid fasting, particularly if someone is kaphic. So we recommend juice and vegetable fasts, particularly if there's a lot of ama in the system, and the person's constitution can tolerate it. So if someone is at the end stages of AIDS and lost, 25 pounds, even though they have a lot of ama, they're not going to tolerate the fasting. But if someone has the muscle bulk and the body tissue to tolerate it, then a day of fasting can be very valuable. What we usually recommend is it starts after dinner. From that point on until the morning after the next, everything is taken in the form of a liquid. So lots of fresh water and ginger tea during the day, fresh squeezed vegetables and fruits, carrots, great, tomato, spinach, apple, just drinking throughout. If a person feels like they just need more bulk, then we recommend they make very thin vegetable soups, which they can actually blend up and it still will be primarily liquid, or mung dal, very loose mung dal. So it's really very liquidy. And by just doing that for a day or two, it really helps the ama to be reduced, the agnis to pick up again. Kapha types can do this about once a week. Pitta types maybe a couple times a month, and Vata types occasionally, maybe once a month at most. But it's very useful, particularly if you've been through a real stressful time and now you can take a day or two to yourself. It's great to just simplify everything. Let yourself clear out. You shouldn't be doing this, though, while you have a big business meeting going on or a lot of other pressures. It should be a time of an inward stroke where while you're fasting, you can take it quiet. Take a quiet day. Meditate extra. Go for walks in the park. Just be quiet so that your body can really release toxicity and doesn't have to process information from the environment. These are some of the common cleansing herbal foods that we use. Aloe vera we've talked about. Aloe vera is a really beautiful plant. One of its names in Sanskrit is Kumari, which means having the ability to act like a nursemaid. So it's very healing. We know how it works on the skin. There's different parts to the aloe vera plant. The part right underneath the skin is very laxative. So if you take that part, it's a very potent laxative, like senna or like castor oil or like cascara. But the inner part of it is actually very purifying and cleansing, and it's quite bitter. It's cleansing to the liver. It's particularly useful for the female tract. So for women who are having dysmenorrhea or PMS, women going through menopause, even for infertility, aloe vera is very cleansing to that whole system. Triple is the three fruits, amlaki, bibitaki, harataki, which are very balancing to the colon and also very cleansing. So when people are toxic, we often have them take triphala, a teaspoon a few times a day, or a couple tablets a couple times a day. And it's very useful in cleansing, particularly the gastrointestinal system. Ginger, which comes in a variety of forms, has a name in Sanskrit as Vibwa Wasej, which means the universal medicine. And one of the reasons that it's described that way is that ginger works on all three phases of digestion. Remember, we mentioned Dipan, Pachana, Analomana. Digestion, absorption, elimination. And ginger acts on all three levels. So it enhances digestion, enhances absorption, and is mildly laxative. So it keeps things flowing through the digestive tract. It's very purifying. To make a tea out of it, just recommend grating up about a half of a teaspoon, putting it into a pint thermos bottle, and just sipping it throughout the day. So for people who have an ama pacifying program, we actually ask them to keep it with them. And throughout the day, every hour or so, just take a couple swallows of this hot ginger tea, which keeps them flushing through. We mentioned manjista and neem. These are classical Ayurvedic cleansing foods. Gugalu, it's Comifera mucal. It's this resin. It's one of the most powerful Ayurvedic herbs. It's readily available now. About 5 or 6 American herb companies are offering this through health food stores. It's useful in general detoxification. It's probably the most important herb for arthritis. It's useful in diabetes. It lowers the blood cholesterol level. It's mildly laxative. So if you take Gugalu every day, your stools will get a little bit loose as this resin pulls toxins out of your system. Garlic is a complicated herb, and we know that it has rejuvenative value. Ayurveda doesn't use it that much because it's said that garlic has somewhat of a rajasic or tamasic effect on the mind. Remember, we talked about 3 principles of the mind, the gunas, the sattva, which is the creative, pure aspect, rajasic, which is more this transformational aspect, and then tamasic, which is this kind of stable or dull aspect. And so certain herbs like garlic, onions to a degree as well, are a little bit dulling to the mind, so that it's not used a lot because Ayurveda ultimately is a science of creating enlightenment. But for short periods of time, when someone is toxic or is having a lot of activity, a lot of vata imbalance, garlic is useful in that regard. And certainly from a Western medicine, we've recently understood that this allicin is a very powerful antioxidant and clearly beneficial in a variety of health concerns like cardiovascular disease. So let's move into this process of panchakarma. Panchakarma means the 5 actions. Pancha is Sanskrit for 5. Karma, we know, is action. So in Ayurveda, there are these 5 intensive purifying procedures, which we don't use in their totality today. But we'll go through them. There's 3 stages to panchakarma. There's a preparatory phase, the principal phase, and then the post-procedure phase. And so in order to gain the full value of these elimination procedures, you've got to prepare the system for them. So we'll go through that. The preparatory phase, known as purva karma, consists of these 2 components, snehana and swedana. Snehana is another word for oleation, for oiling the system. And so Ayurveda makes a lot of use of oils, both on the skin as well as internally. And the reason is that, according to Ayurveda, ama, this toxic residue, is fat-soluble. It's not that water-soluble. So if you want to mobilize deep-rooted ama from the tissues, drinking a lot of liquid, is not going to get to it. But by using purified herbalized oils, you can extract it from the tissues. So in Ayurveda, it's said that when you massage the body, that oil moves through the tissues, eventually ending up in the gastrointestinal system, and on the way, it's pulling ama out. If you take herbalized oils internally, sesame oil or herbalized ghee, it said it travels through the tissues, and as it travels through the tissues, it's extracting the ama. So oiling is valuable. In fact, massage in Ayurveda, although it's recognized how good it feels and all the other effects, it's really, in this process of panchakarma, is primarily a way to bring the oil into the body, which is always herbalized and always carrying these herbal substances through the tissues. The second aspect of the preparatory procedures is swedana. So our word sweat comes from the Sanskrit word swedan. And there's dozens of different procedures described to heat up the body, ranging from laying out in the sun to going into a pit with hot rocks to boxing to running to sitting in hot water. There's a number of different procedures. At the Chopra Center, we use several of these. We use a steam bath. We use wrapping people with hot towels and blankets. We use this wonderful hot oil treatment. And so these 2 procedures are said to prepare the system to eliminate the toxin. Snehana extracts the ama from the tissues. Swedana dilates the channels of circulation and allows for the ama to move into the shrotas so it can be eliminated. Same way that if you have olive oil that's been sitting in your cold pantry, it doesn't flow very well. You heat it up, it flows more easily. It's said the same is true of ama. So these are the 2 preparatory procedures. These are the ways that we internally oleate people. Ghee is clarified butter. And in Ayurveda, ghee is considered a very nurturing, healing substance. Now, ghee is basically the essence of milk. It's the essence of butter, which is the essence of cream, which is the essence of milk. So the concern always is, well, what about cholesterol? So far, I haven't really seen a good study on ghee's effect on cholesterol levels. According to Ayurveda, by herbalizing it, it reduces its tendency to stay in the body and is really used as a media to carry the herbs through the tissues. If you look at the total amount of cholesterol in a teaspoon of ghee, it's something like 5 milligrams, which is a very low percentage of a daily intake. So when we recommend a little bit of ghee for people, it's useful in Vata and Pitta conditions. We're not concerned that we're suddenly going to bump their cholesterol levels up. During the Panchakarma preparation, we actually have people take a lot of ghee, tablespoons every day for 5 days. If someone has a history of high cholesterol or coronary artery disease, then we don't use ghee. We go to one of the other ways of herbalizing the oil. The third thing that we use is sesame, and what we tend to do, and this seems to be now the most popular way of administering this, is we have people chew on sesame seeds. Sesame seeds are about 70% oil. So without having to drink sesame oil, which is not that pleasant, We have people chew on sesame seeds with some raisins, and it's actually delicious, and it has the same effect of oleating the internal system. You want enough so that you can actually see lubrication in the bowels. So we have people oleate for 5 to 7 days. And then again, there's lots of different ways to heat up the body. We tend to use these steam tents, herbalized oils, and then these heat wraps as the best way. But you can do this at home. You can do massage and take a hot bath, and then you can take a gentle herbal laxative. Now, it doesn't have to be laxative, even just some triphala, which will be ensuring that ama is pouring out of your system. If you believe that the body holds on to toxicity, then how is it going to eliminate it? It's going to eliminate it through some type of opening. So it can either come out through the sweat glands, come out through the nose, come out through the mouth, come out through your urine, come out through your bowels. So the panchakarmas are really designed to enhance that process of natural elimination of the malas. We'll talk about these almost more from a historical interest than from a real interest, because we're not using all of them. Vamana is the process of therapeutic emesis, therapeutic vomiting. Sounds pretty disgusting. How it's done is usually very gentle. You have someone drink a lot of tea, usually licorice tea, so your stomach is really quite full. And then you give a little tiny pinch of one of a number of these emetic herbs, like ipecac is something that we use here in the United States when someone has swallowed some poison and we think it's safe to have them vomit. And then in a very gentle way, these vomiting stimulants allow you to empty your stomach. Kapha is said to have a major site in the stomach. And so it's most classically used in people with severe kapha imbalances, like asthma or allergies. Our Ayurvedic consultants from India use it regularly and tell us that when they treat a patient, say a child with asthma, a few treatments of vamana, they can often completely eliminate their need for steroids or theophylline or inhalers for months at a time. It's not entirely foreign to us in the West, and we do tend to pull things out of people's stomachs when we think they're not eating very well. When you're really sick, often your body will allow you to vomit it up. Virechana means purgation, and we do use this regularly. It's particularly useful to help eliminate accumulated pitta from the physiology. So what we do is we have people oil internally, take a hot bath, and then take one of a number of gentle laxatives. Usually we use either castor oil or senna, but we sometimes use other ones as well. It's the most effective way, according to Ayurveda, of bringing out this excess fire from the system. It's quite a useful pitta pacifying process. If you're having problems with menstruation, every time a few days before your period you get irritable and overheated, and then using a mild laxative, generally at the middle of the month, will often promptly reduce those symptoms. It's useful in people with migraines, particularly people who have migraines related to their periods, because the menstrual cycle is the way that a woman has of releasing pitta from her body. As we said, Rakta, the blood element, is one of the strongest carriers of pitta in the physiology. So the reason that overall, if you had to plot pittas of men versus women premenopausally, that men have more pitta than women, is that Ayurveda says women have this opportunity every month to release some of the fire in their body. Once women go through menopause, they no longer have this opportunity, so that the risk of cardiovascular disease rises, which is a pitta disease. The risk of osteoporosis rises, which is a pitta vata disease. What's one of the common symptoms that women get at the time of menopause? Hot flashes, because they've lost the ability to eliminate that heat from their system. So in those times, bringing the heat out of the system will often reduce some of those symptoms. Okay, so that's Virechana. Nasya is a way of treating head and neck problems. Nasya usually involves first a head and neck massage and then some herbalized oil drops into the nasal passages. And depending upon what you're treating, you can change the herb so that if someone has a vata problem and lots of headaches, you can use a vata pacifying herb. If someone has a lot of kapha problems and a lot of congestion and sinus problems, you can use a kapha pacifying herb. So it's a way of applying medicine to that area. We usually only use 1 or 2 drops of herbalized oil. It's very helpful for people with recurrent allergies. In fact, a great, simple home purification procedure that we recommend commonly for people with allergies is using a neti pot. A neti pot looks like a little tiny porcelain Aladdin's lamp. What you do is you fill this little pot with some warm salt water. There's the proportion, I think it's a 1/4 teaspoon per pot. And then you hold it up to your nose, and it clears out your nasal passages. You do it one side, then you hold it up, do the other side. And then after that, put a little bit of herbalized oil in your nostril. Just put it on your finger and sniff it up on either side. For people who have allergies, particularly environmental allergies, it often goes a long way toward reducing it. Because if you do it first thing in the morning, it clears out all the pollen or dust that you've accumulated all night as you've been snoring. So it cleans that out. And then the oil seems to have a protective effect on the inner lining of the mucous membranes. So even though the pollen is there, it's not triggering all the histamine responses. That's a simple thing that you can do using this nausea. Then everybody's favorite treatment is the use of Bastis. We have a little bumper sticker you could buy at the store. It says, "Honk if you love Basti." It's very quiet around the Chopra Center. Bastis are these herbalized enemas. It's said that one of the major sites of Vata is the colon. And so if you want to treat Vata, Bastis are the ways that are recommended. Now, from a Western perspective, there's usually some resistance to this at first. And so I've obviously been thinking about it for years. If you imagine being a doctor 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and you had a sick person, and you wanted to get in medicines into that person, but they were perhaps too sick to take things orally, we didn't have the ability to start an IV. It turns out that if you herbalize oils and apply them to the colonic mucus, it's a very efficient way of getting medicines into the system. So the colon is actually a fairly efficient way of applying medicinal substances. So you can put almost any therapeutic herb that you can take orally into a Basti, or you use it as a purification process. It's not like colonics. Ayurveda, if anything, discourages this idea of putting gallons of water into the colon. It's usually very gentle, volumes of maybe as little as 80 cc's, a third of a cup, to 300 or 400 cc's. And there's a specific course of treatment that we use based upon whether or not it's Vata, Pitta, Kapha, what the primary concerns are. If someone is intolerant of Bastis, you can get a very similar effect by giving people the herbs orally, and it will eventually have the same elimination, purification effect. But if you read the classical literature, there's statements like 75 or 80% of all illness can be cured through the appropriate Basti. There's one more, which almost nobody uses. It's called Rakta Mokshana, which is translated as bloodletting. Now, bloodletting, of course, has gotten a very bad rap in the West ever since we killed our first president with leeches. And yet we actually use bloodletting a lot in Western medicine. Dialysis for kidney disease is really a form of bloodletting. Plasma exchange, which we use commonly in a variety of neurological diseases, is a form of bloodletting. There's two conditions, relatively common conditions, that we actually do take blood out of a person's body. One is polycythemia vera, which is a condition where you produce too many red cells, almost like the equivalent to leukemia, except it's red cell. And the other is hemochromatosis, where your body accumulates too much iron, and it causes eventual damage and cirrhosis of the liver. So, too much red cells and too much iron accumulation of the liver. What kind of diseases are those? Pitta diseases. And the treatment for both of those in Western medicine is regular removal of blood. So it's another example of how there's some consistent theoretical basis to even many of the modern treatments that we do, looked at from an Ayurvedic perspective. Occasionally, very occasionally, if someone has a very strong Pitta constitution and they're just constantly getting one Pitta aggravation after another, we'll suggest that they go ahead and give a pint at the blood bank. But there are herbs that have that similar effect. They're known as alteratives or blood cleansers. Again, aloe vera is one of the good ones. Most of the bitter herbs have a blood cleansing effect. And so we think about in terms of what can we do to clear toxicity out of rasa and rakta, out of the first two dhatus, plasma and blood. So we've talked about the three primary sites Kapha is mostly in the stomach, Pitta is in the small intestine, Vata is in the colon. So when we have people go through our full Panchakarma program, we do something to treat Ama associated with Vata and Pitta and Kapha. So we use Nasya to help with the Kapha, we use Virachana to help with the Pitta, we use Bastis to help with the Vata. Now, after someone has gone through this process of elimination, then we want to make certain that now that we've cleaned someone out, if their Ama level has been reduced, we don't want them to immediately reaccumulate it. So this is where we go through this whole process of post-therapeutic interventions, known as Pashat Karma. First thing we want to do is gradually rekindle their Agnis. So a very simplified diet for a day while we increase their spices is a very valuable thing. We have this little aperitif that we have all of our guests use, which is this combination of lemon juice, ginger juice, and a little bit of honey. It's actually quite delicious. It's spicy. We have people do that every day before they eat their meal to get the Agnis kindled. So we have them keep a fairly simplified diet for a few days when they go home, and then gradually increase the complexity of that. Maintaining the good daily routine that Deepak talked about earlier is essential to keeping Ama from accumulating. If you start staying up late right away, eating your meals at strange times, not honoring your appetites, you're just going to get back into the same cycle. So after having gone through this cleansing process, we really encourage people to use it as a way of committing to a healthier lifestyle. Now, once someone has gone through a purification process, there are certain foods which are particularly nurturing and nourishing. Ayurveda talks about these as the 4 sattvic foods, the 4 pure foods: milk, ghee, almonds, and honey. Particularly if a person is relatively Ama-free, we recommend that people take some of these 4 foods every day. A glass of milk a day, cook with a little bit of ghee, a few almonds a day, and using honey. They're just said to be very nourishing to the system at both a physical and a subtle body level. Daily oil massage, we've talked about how that really will keep the process going. So if you've gone through some purification, either a brief home purification or at a Ayurvedic center, then if you do that massage every day, you're going to keep that Ama from reaccumulating in the tissues. Meditation, obviously, pranayama, and then really looking at relationships, making certain that you don't come out of this experience where you know yourself as spirit, you're feeling great about your life, and you immediately get back into a relationship where someone is a toxic influence of your life. So you will be stronger after going through purification, but you'll also be more sensitive. And if you're picking up things that are not that useful in your environment, it's really the greatest opportunity to change. Talk a little bit about rasayanas. You know this word rasa now. Rasa means the subtlest aspect, the first dhatu, rasa, this plasma. Rasayanas are foods that directly nourish the rasa. They improve the quality of the tissues. So they're not really foods in the sense of quantity. They're foods in the sense of changing the quality. And they're most effective, rasayanas are most effective after you've been through some purification. You know, if you're pretty toxic and you begin to ingest these very nourishing foods, they tend to be quite rich. So if there's already a blockage there, you're just going to keep piling it up behind the blockage. Once you've reduced the Ama and the Shrotas are clear, then the rasayanas are really able to go into the tissue layers and have a deeper effect. So these are some of the classic ones. Chavan Prash is a paste, a jam made from amlaki, which is Emblic myrobalan. It's one of the 3 fruits in Triphala. It's the highest natural source of vitamin C on the planet Earth. It's about 10 times more potent carrier of vitamin C than oranges. And it has a long, literally a 5,000-year plus history of as a rejuvenative. Chavan Prash is widely available in India, and every herbal company in India has its own little proprietary formula of Chavan Prash. If you read the original Charaka, you will see the full formula out there. This much amlaki, add this much ghee, this much honey, this much ashwagandha, this much shatavari, this much pipali. I mean, precise formula. And then everybody adds a little bit here or there so they can make it proprietary. The Bio-Chavan is the IP product formulation of Chavan Prash, which we've tried to make so it's more palatable to Western tastes. You can either take it out of the can directly, jar directly, or you can mix it in some juice or some hot milk. So it's a racine. It's something that builds the tissues. It's good if you're depleted, but it's said to be a protector. Brahma Rasayana is another commonly available one of these nutritives. Brahma it's interesting. This herb Brahmi in India has been applied to several different plants. One of them in the United States we call gotu-kola. But the one that really is Brahmi is another one called Centinella asiatica. But it's said to be one of the most purifying herbs for the mind, in that it quiets but simultaneously clears. So it's very useful in students who are studying and people who use their minds a lot. And it actually, combined with other herbs, is very beneficial for people who are having insomnia, because it just quiets, it creates that sense of awareness. It's very similar to the feeling of after you've done that vigorous pranayama, where your mind is really quite quiet but very alert. So Brahma Rasayana is another useful rejuvenative. Ashwagandha, which is now widely available in the United States, is known as winter cherry. And it's said to be probably the most potent vitalizing herb in the Indian pharmacology. So that whenever someone is depleted, lack of energy, impotent, infertile, suffering with chronic fatigue, weakness in the nervous tissue, multiple sclerosis, ashwagandha is this very useful tonic which gets into the system quickly. And actually there have been several good studies recently. It's falling into the category of this new kind of modern herbal category of what's known as an adaptogen. Those of you who have studied herbs, you'll know this word, adaptogen, which means it makes you more resistant to stress. So if you take mice, and the classical stress for mice is you have them swim in a cage where they can't get out, and you measure stress hormones and immune function. When you give the mice ashwagandha in their food, they show less of a stress response. So people are taking a real interest in this now. Shatavari is also known as Indian asparagus. It's not like the asparagus that we eat, although it's in the same general family. It's Asparagus racemosus. And it's said to be the most nurturing food for women. It's particularly useful for the reproductive tract and for breasts, so that almost every mother in India eats shatavari, takes shatavari when they're breastfeeding. It's said it increases the quality and the quantity of breast milk. It's useful, again, similar in some ways, although it's different in its qualities, but in its usefulness, it's similar to kumari, to aloe vera juice. So we use it commonly in women with menstrual irregularities, dysmenorrhea, functional infertility, moms who are breastfeeding. So it's a very useful, it's very nourishing food. Bala means immunity. It's one of the qualities of ojas, and it's also an herb. It's Siddha cordifolia, and it's very nurturing, and it's used in a similar way to ashwagandha and shatavari. It's a secondary rejuvenative, where when people are fatigued, generally low energy levels, it's very useful. So those are some of the common rasayanas. Now you can also look at rasayanas in terms of dosha. Rasayanas in general are subtler than the dosha, so it's hard to cause a problem with a rasayana. But if someone is really toxic and you give them a lot of rasayana without first purifying them, they probably, at the very least, won't be able to use it. At the worst, it could actually make them more toxic because their body isn't capable of metabolizing this really nurturing substance. So for vatas, the rasayanas are ashwagandha we mentioned, gugulu you know now, which is the myrrh. Harataki, hara means to carry away. Harataki means that which carries disease away. Harataki is Shibulik myrobalan. It's one of the three fruits in Triphala. So harataki is particularly useful for vata. Ginseng, although it's not a classical Ayurvedic herb, it's very similar in many ways to ashwagandha. Actually, there's another one called Vidara Kandi, which is sometimes known as Indian ginseng. Ginseng has very much rasayana effects. For pitta, amlaki, again, it's this herb that makes up chavan prash. Amlaki means that which carries away ama. Saffron is a expensive but available herb, which is particularly beneficial for pittas. And aloe vera has a very cooling influence on the liver and in general. And then kapha, Vibhataki is the third fruit. It's Balearic myrobalan, and it has a Rasayan effect on kapha. Guggulu, again, we've talked about. And Pipali, which is this hot pepper, which has a purifying and nurturing effect on kapha. So we will use these more specifically for people based upon their dosha. Talk about the behavioral rasayanas. These are the classical first two steps on the eightfold path of yoga. Yama and niyama. And basically, if you know the 7 spiritual laws of success and you practice them in your life, you are practicing the behavioral rasayanas. Meaning, how do we get nourishment at that deep level from our behaviors, from our relationships? So it's really quite simple. Ahimsa was really the prized concept of Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence. And we all saw how powerful ahimsa can be. He got an entire invading force to leave the country without ever having to fire a shot. So, non-violence, kindness to everything. Satya, practicing honesty and truth in your life. Asteya, it's kind of been traditionally translated as non-stealing. We see taking responsibility, not blaming other people for your situation, taking responsibility, seeing responsibility as the ability to have a creative response to any situation. Brahmacharya has generally been talked about as sexual continence. We think a more expanded view of this is really what it means, which is to see Brahma, to see consciousness in everything that you do, to always be striving toward unity in your life. Apagraha means trying to not complicate your life, maintaining a level of simplicity. And the practices, Saukya, just having clarity, not being rigid, but being true to yourself. Santosa, meaning accepting the present moment as it is, seeing what lesson there is to learn, and then making the choice. Tapas has often been talked about as austerity. Really what it means is part of the dharmic view of everybody is here to express their unique talents, to discover their highest self, and in that process to serve the rest of the world. Svadhyaya, study, just continuously deepening your understanding of life. And Ishvara Pradhana means striving towards your highest purpose. So if you practice the 7 spiritual laws of success in your life, you'll really be absolutely practicing the best in the way of behavioral rasayanas.
This session is about biological rhythms. And when we're speaking of the qualities of spirit, one of them was that spirit manifests in cycles, in rhythms, and in seasons. The physical body of the spirit is the universe. And actually, if you look at that word, it means universe. It means one song. The very word universe implies the inherent rhythmicity or musical nature of existence, of life. So, only in the last few years have scientists begun to understand, although this has been something that has been known for thousands of years in Ayurveda, but in the last few years, scientists have begun to understand that our biological rhythms are, in fact, a mirror of cosmic rhythms. That what happens in the cosmos and the inherent rhythmicities that play themselves out in the cosmos also play themselves out in our biology as our biological rhythms. In fact, as a result of these discoveries in science over the last 2 decades, a whole new field of biology has emerged. And that field is known as chronobiology. Chronos means time. Biology, of course, is the science of life. So how does life function in relationship to time? And even though in the West, we've always had the notion that time is linear, in the Eastern theoretical frameworks, time has been regarded as the movement of consciousness which separates the observer from the observed. Time is manufactured when the self is sacrificed for the self-image, when the spirit is sacrificed for the ego, and from there on into its many diverse expressions in this process, which is known as morphogenesis and differentiation. Time is the continuity of memory, which uses the ego, the self-image, as the internal reference point, which is what separates the observer from the observed. In reality, the observer and the observed are one unified, dynamic field of existence in life where there is, in fact, no time. Past, present, and future are part of a continuum of consciousness that goes round and round in circles. And if there is an artifact of time, then that artifact expresses itself cyclically. Everything is a cycle. And so birth and death are part of the cycle. Now, from a strictly biological point of view, science is recognizing that you can give the same dose of a drug to a person at a certain time of the day or in a certain season, and it will have a different effect. Different types of food are metabolized differently. There are different responses to chemotherapy and radiation, different times of the day, different seasons. Your body is very different at 6 o'clock in the morning than it is at 6 in the evening. And this is at all levels, physical, biochemical, quantum mechanical, at the level of energy and information. You are indeed a completely different person, physiologically, biochemically, on the material level, on the psychological level, on the emotional level, and so on. All activities in the body have cycles upon cycles upon cycles. And as I said earlier, these cycles are a manifestation of cosmic cycles. So let's first examine some of these cosmic cycles. The first one is called the circadian rhythm in science, circadian rhythm. And this cycle comes about as a result of the Earth spinning on its own axis. As the Earth spins on its own axis, we have the cycle of the 24-hour day. And this cycle of the 24-hour day causes the circadian rhythm in the body. And circadian rhythms have been a subject of intense study by scientists for the last 3 or 4 decades. For example, early in the morning, if you measure somebody's cortisol levels, which is an adrenal hormone, it'll be extremely high. In the late afternoon, it'll be low. And there is a cyclicity to the secretion of cortisol, growth hormone, prolactin, etc., etc. In Ayurveda, it has been understood that that 24-hour cycle of the day can be divided into 6 distinct phases. And these 6 distinct phases have to do with the 3 principal modalities through which consciousness functions. And by now you know what they are: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So from 6 in the morning to 10 in the morning is a Kapha phase. That means, irrespective of your body type, from 6 in the morning to 10 in the morning, it doesn't matter if you're Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, for you, that will be a relatively hypometabolic phase. So, if you're Vata, of course, you're already hypermetabolic. The metabolism for you will come down by a little bit. And if you're a real Kapha, then your metabolism will slow down quite significantly. So this obviously has some implications in terms of activity, in terms of diet, in terms of treatment of illnesses. This is a good time to exercise. Your body is hypometabolic, you need to mobilize it. If you're a Kapha body type, you have a tendency to gain weight easily, or the kind of person who says, all I have to do is look at food and I start to gain weight, which is frequently a kapha complaint, then this is a good time not to eat. Or if you're going to take some nutritional supplements, this is a good time to take a kapha balancing herbal tea or some kapha balancing churna or powders or something like that. It's a good time for activity, good time for physical exercise. Kapha body types can do with a lot of extra physical activity, and it's also a good time to take, if anything, nutritional supplements that speed up the metabolism, that have the basic taste of astringent, bitter, and pungent. And it's also a good time for those people who need chemotherapy. And this is an important point that I want to make right now. How do chemotherapeutic drugs work? Well, most chemotherapeutic drugs, and for that matter, most antibiotics too, work by interfering with the replication at the level of the DNA. That's how a chemotherapeutic drug works. So the attack is at the cancer cell that's multiplying itself, and the multiplication, of course, occurs at the level of the DNA. And when you give somebody chemotherapy, your hope is that it's going to kill the cancer cell, which sometimes it does, but the drug being directed at DNA, directed at rapidly multiplying cells, is not selective. It kills anything that's multiplying rapidly. And what's multiplying rapidly in the human body? Well, a few cells are multiplying very rapidly. Cells in the skin, cells in the mucous membranes, cells in the stomach, cells in the hair follicles, cells in the gonads. That's why the dominant effects of chemotherapy, the side effects, are hair loss, ulceration of the skin, mucous membrane ulcerations, nausea, vomiting, impotence, and sterility. These are the major side effects of chemotherapeutic drugs because they attack rapidly multiplying cells and not selectively. And therefore, if you give a drug in the kapha period, you're more likely to spare the normal cells because they're in a hypometabolic phase, and at the same time maximize the effect on the rapidly multiplying cells. Cancer cells are rapidly multiplying, but so are other body cells. Not all other body cells, but the ones I mentioned, hair follicles, skin cells, mucous membrane, gastrointestinal cells, etc. The difference is that your body cells, the normal cells, obey biological rhythms. They obey cosmic cycles. And cancer cells are renegade cells that have lost their dharma. This is a very interesting concept, which is an Ayurvedic concept. It says that the cancer cell is not in its dharma. Every cell in the body is in its dharma. Dharma means it has a purpose. The law of dharma, which says there's purpose in life. Okay? So each cell has a dharma. And the dharma comes from its memory of what it's supposed to do. A cancer cell is a renegade cell that has lost its memory of purpose. And because it's lost its dharma, it just is rampant. It's a rampantly violent cell that is just continuously multiplying, and it does not have any relationship to the cosmic cycles which other cells have. So it's always multiplying, whereas the other multiplying cells in the body go through these cycles of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So by knowing this, what you can do is you can select the drug to be given at a period when the body cells are obeying cosmic rhythms and the cancer cells are not. And now what happens is the drug then, given in the right dose, will selectively attack the cancer cells and spare the other cells in the body, giving you maximum therapeutic benefit and at the same time minimizing the toxicity. In fact, you can reduce the dose of the drug. So that's one very important insight that we have from Ayurveda based on the biological cycles. The approach to cancer, from a strictly Ayurvedic perspective, would not be a violent approach, because violence begets violence. It's a basic law of nature. And a chemotherapeutic approach is essentially a violent approach. And Veda says you do not use violence, even in threatening situations, unless as a last resort, unless it's the last thing you do, because you know that this is the only thing that's left to do. So what's the Ayurvedic approach to cancer? Not to kill the cell, not to be violent at the cell, but to try and restore its dharma, bring it back to its memory of who this cell is, what is its purpose. And how do you do that? Well, you create an environment in the body where every other cell is completely and totally in harmony with every other cell and with cosmic cycles. And that environment then reminds the renegade cell, this is how I should be behaving also. So you create balance in the body. You don't even attack the cancer cells. You create balance, as much balance as you can, as close to the state of least entropy. And then you are supposed to remind the cancer cell what its dharma is. Okay, so much about this first period, the kapha period. From 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. is the pitta cycle. And the pitta cycle is the cycle where your body is in this transformative phase. All the agnis, all the fire is at its heightened phase. The digestive agni, the enzymes, these are all the different aspects of pitta. So this is the period, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., where metabolism and digestion are most effective. And therefore, Ayurveda recommends that this is the best time to eat a meal. And this is the big meal of the day, from 10 to 2, ideally speaking, around 12 noon. If you eat your meal around then, and this is the meal that you must have access to all the 6 tastes, this meal will be digested the best and will be metabolized the best. From 2 o'clock to 6 p.m. is the Vata cycle. And during this Vata phase, what happens is that the body goes into a hypermetabolic phase again. And this is the time when there is, provided you're in balance, there's maximum mental clarity and there's maximum dexterity in your physical body. So this is the time to do mental work, creative work. From 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. is the second kapha cycle, begins again. It's like 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then again 6 p.m. to 10. And what happens is your metabolic rate has gone up to its maximum peak and now it starts to decline again. And at 10 p.m. or so, it reaches its lowest point. 10 p.m. or so, your body reaches its lowest, or nadir, what is called the nadir, the lowest point in its metabolic rate. Therefore, this is a time to start to wind down, to have recreation, to take it easy, and by 10 p.m. or maximum 10:30, to catch that low metabolic cycle, you'll have the best sleep if you fall asleep around 10 o'clock. The quality of sleep will be the best. Between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., you start the second pitta cycle. So assuming you're asleep, then your agnis go to work again. Your metabolic fire goes up. Your digestive agnis, but also all the enzymatic activity is a function of pitta. So during this phase, what happens is that the body starts to renew itself. It starts to get rid of toxins. Renewal, rejuvenation occurs between 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Now let's say you are a strong pitta body type and you happen to be awake during this time for whatever reason, out of habit or you have other things to do. then this is the time you are likely to raid the refrigerator. Because all that Agni, which is supposed to be actually cleaning your body and getting rid of the toxins and transforming itself back to a state of renewal, all that Agni is active, you're awake, off you go and raid the refrigerator. So Pitta body types who tend to stay up have the habit of binge eating at night, and they tend to get obese. Imbalanced Pittas get obese because of this reason. And the treatment here is a Pitta balancing that and going to bed at about 10 o'clock, 10:30 latest. Nothing else will work. You can give them all the kapha balancing supplements and churnas and teas. Nothing will work because it's not a kapha problem, it's a Pitta problem. From 2 in the morning to 6 in the morning, you begin your second Vata cycle. And this is the time that the body starts to increase its metabolic rate as well. And this is the time for rejuvenation of the subtle body. The rapid activity in this period, in the morning, also results in rapid eye movements. And this is the time that dreaming is most active. And according to Ayurveda, dreaming is very necessary to cleanse and detoxify and renew the subtle body. The physical body renews itself by getting rid of toxins, but so does the subtle body renew itself. And it does so through dreaming. So if there's any disturbance in this phase, from 2 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning, then you're likely to get all kinds of psychological problems, depression, maybe other kinds of psychiatric problems as well. And what suppresses this cycle more than anything else is alcohol and sedatives and tranquilizers. So as a result, dreaming is interfered with. So you might take a sleeping pill and you think you had a good night's sleep, but actually when you wake up, you don't feel that fresh. And the reason you don't feel that fresh is that you have suppressed the Vata cycle at night. And having suppressed the Vata cycle, you have a build-up in your body of toxins in the subtle body. And in fact, one of the symptoms of withdrawal from heavy sedation or from heavy alcohol or from heavy ingestion of tranquilizers, one of the symptoms is what? Delirium tremens. That's an exaggerated Vata experience, result of suppressed Vata at night. In fact, people get hallucinations in the DTs, and the hallucinations are just those suppressed dreams that are manifesting now, even in the waking state. So that's the dynamics of that phase. If you measure biochemical activity during this cycle, you'll find this is from 2 to 6 a.m. is when all the hormones and all the neurotransmitters, cortisol, adrenaline, they start going up. And your heart rate starts to go up a little bit during this time. Your blood pressure starts to creep up. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, it reaches its peak. So if you get up around this time, and you get up feeling really fresh, and you feel, wow, I'm ready to conquer the world. This is the 24-hour cycle as nature plays itself out through our body. Now, if we were enlightened, and if we were totally aware of all that's happening in our body, we wouldn't need to know any of this, because all we would do is we would listen to our body's signals. And our body tells us, I'm hungry, and at 12 noon, I want this. Body tells us at 10 o'clock, this is the time to go to sleep. The body does this all for us. It's our interference with this that starts to cause the first disruption in biological rhythm. And the experience of that, the first disruption in biological rhythm, is a sense of fatigue. You just feel not so much energy. The second phase of that is you start to feel a little dis-ease and discomfort. This is the first stage of disease, really. And if you continue then to violate this cycle, then that will ultimately result in one of those manifestations of disease, whether it's a vata or a kapha or pitta problem, depends on which cycle, which phase of the cycle is disrupted. So one of the most common experiences that anyone knows what a disruption in circadian rhythm would be. If you've traveled, then jet lag is a perfect example of a disruption in circadian rhythm. You take a flight from here, you can be in England in 6 hours. You suddenly put yourself in an environment where the cosmic rhythm is completely different from your biological rhythm. And yet, all you have to do is just be in that environment for a little while, and then your body starts to entrain again with the cosmic rhythm. Now, if you want to facilitate that process, then you would do what? During the flight, you would meditate. Why? When you meditate, then you go into the gap. And in the gap, actually, there is no rhythmic activity at all. It's the source of all the rhythms. So what you do is, in a sense, you suspend that. You go into a state of suspended animation. And when you get there, your body picks up the rhythm that's there as quickly as possible. Sleeping, meditation, not eating or fasting are ways to very quickly restore biological rhythms. If you're on a long flight, eat before you get on the flight. On the flight, drink lots of water, meditate, don't watch the movie. And when you get there, immediately fall into the cycle. That's the local cycle, which means eat when it's time to eat over there. Sleep when it's time to sleep over there. If you work a night shift, then also your biological rhythm is likely to be disrupted. It's okay if you do that once in a while, but if you're doing that continuously, then no matter what anyone tells you, no matter how much you sleep during the day, your biological rhythm is not going to fully adapt. And sooner or later, your body is going to protest in the form of some illness. So night shifts, even though they are an invention, remember, the light bulb brought about the night shift. The invention of the light bulb brought about the night shift. And even though it's very, very healthy for the economy, perhaps, it certainly is not good for your physiological well-being. Okay, so that's a little bit about the circadian rhythm. I want to move to the other rhythms. So let's move to the second cycle. The second cycle is the cycle of the seasons. Again, it's a cosmic cycle. The Earth goes around the sun, and as a result of that movement, we have the cycle of the seasons, particularly in temperate zones. So you have a seasonal cycle in your body as well. If you get depressed in winter, or if you fall in love in spring, the reason for that is a biochemical reason. And of course, nature orchestrates these biological rhythms with absolute exquisite coordination. The groundhog comes out of the earth, it's going to be spring, the birds begin to migrate, the fish are going back to their spawning grounds. It's a whole symphony being orchestrated in nature. We're part of it. So the seasons affect us, the seasons in our lives. And winter, being cold and wet, is a kapha season. So if you're a kapha body type, you're more likely to have kapha problems, including things like congestive heart failure, which is a kapha situation, or edema, pedal edema, or cyclic edema, or types of arthritis which have a lot of fluid retention, or bronchial asthma, or bronchitis, sinusitis. These are all kapha aggravations that are more likely in winter, particularly if you happen to be a kapha body type. Summer, being hot and moist, is a pitta season and is more likely to cause inflammatory problems, especially if you are a pitta body type. So skin rashes, ulcers, inflammatory types of arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, inflammatory emotions. They all occur more frequently in Pitta season and obviously in Pitta body types. As you look across different cultures in the world, you find that in most geographical locations, you can actually identify the dominant dosha. So the dominant dosha in the United States is Vata. We have fast foods, fast lanes, fast relationships, fast everything, right? The average relationship lasts about as long as a video program. So we change our jobs fast. Everything is done fast. And actually, if you do a statistical kind of survey in the United States, you'll find that 70% of people are Vata body type. Now you go to the Middle East, and what's the dominant dosha? Pitta. Okay? Everything is hot. Hot tempers, you see all that turbulence, and it's like an emotional cauldron all the time. Okay. You go to Hawaii, Kapha. So you can see that even different cultures, they may show certain kinds of traits. It might help you to understand people a lot more if you knew why they were behaving in a certain way. So Pitta again, summer. And then autumn is a Vata cycle. And Vata problems include things like irritable bowel and migraine headaches and anxiety and restlessness and insomnia and tachycardias and palpitations of the heart are more likely to occur, particularly in Vata people during this time. Heart block, which is bradycardia, more likely to happen in Kapha body types than in Vata body types. So the moral of the story here is that you have to be aware of this, and knowing what your body type is, you have to make certain adjustments. You particularly have to pay attention to your daily activity, especially when you know that this is the season where I'm likely to get my bronchial asthma or my sinusitis or edema. Then I should know why this is happening. I should take precautions that it doesn't happen by following a good daily routine, by taking the appropriate adjustments in terms of both nutrition and diet. A Kapha body type would want to be very careful about following a Kapha balancing diet, particularly in winter. And if you're a Pitta body type, then you want to be very careful of doing that, particularly in summer. Of course, if you're a mixed body type, let's say you're a Vata Pitta body type, then you're more likely to get Vata kinds of problems in autumn and Pitta kind of problems in summer. So you should be doing Pitta balancing program in summer, a Vata balancing program in autumn, and during the rest of the year paying attention to both. So this is actually, most of it is common sense, but as usual, just because it's common sense doesn't mean that we're doing it. Finally, I just want to mention two other rhythms because they're part of the rhythms of the cosmos. The third rhythm is the lunar cycle. The lunar cycle occurs as a result of the Earth and the Moon and the Sun moving in relationship to each other. And the lunar cycle is about 28 days or so. And there are lunar rhythms in the body. Chronobiology is discovering this, that there are changes in the blood pressure, there are changes in the osmotic pressure, there are changes in prolactin levels that follow lunar cycles. What does this mean for practical purposes? I think it means that you should be aware of it, and if you're sensitive to it, you'll see that your moods might change, that your experience of the physical body may have a certain relationship to the lunar cycle. When I was a long time ago working in an emergency room, I used to moonlight, and depending on what the moon was, the experienced nurses in the emergency room would be able to tell the kinds of patients we would get that night. It's a full moon, we're going to get lots of people with congestive heart failure. Reason? Full moon is a Kapha period. It's the complete absence of the moon, we might get lots of patients with arrhythmias. Reason? Absence of the moon is a Vata period. Somewhere in the middle is the Pitta cycle. And you can see the correlations in terms of what happens in imbalanced people. If you're in balance, it doesn't matter. But if you're in imbalance, then that will precipitate the problem. And what creates imbalance? Disruption or violation of that natural law that's expressing itself through you. The other day I gave you a Western definition of stress. And I said stress is the perception of threat, physical or psychological. Now here's the Ayurvedic definition of stress. Stress is that which interferes with the spontaneous flow of nature's intelligence as it goes through our body. We are nature's intelligence, spirit. And anything that interferes with the spontaneous, effortless flow of this intelligence through our physiology is stress. Anything that is a violation of these natural, inherent rhythmicities of the spirit as it moves from unmanifest to manifest. Finally, the last rhythm is the rhythm that occurs as the result of the gravitational effects of the sun and the moon on the earth. And so what rhythm does that bring about? The ocean tides. And just there are ocean tides outside, there are tides in our own physiology. Because once upon a time, in our evolutionary history, we were in the ocean as well. And when we came out of the ocean, first as amphibians and then as mammalians, what we did, we brought a lot of it along with us. And in fact, if you examine the body's fluids have exactly the same things that you find in the ocean. And even though we call this planet Earth, in reality, this is planet ocean. 80% of whatever exists is water. And inside your body, you have an ocean as well. And there are tidal rhythms that obey those cycles. The full tide is the kapha period of the day. And the low tide is the vata. In between is the pitta phase. And actually, you can look at the newspaper, look at the tides. You'll be able to correlate that with this circadian cycle as well. Okay, so for practical purposes, what does this all mean? This means that if we were in perfect balance, that we were in the state of least entropy, then this kind of daily activity would really facilitate the state of least entropy. Entropy is what causes aging. Aging is the loss of this perfect state of balance. If you're constantly flowing with the tide, with the season, with the cycle of nature, then there is no entropy. Theoretically, you're in that perfect harmony. Because does the earth age? I mean, what's the difference between yesterday and today? As far as the earth is concerned, one spin. Is it fatigued for that reason? Well, the answer is no. And as the earth goes around the sun, it keeps doing that again and again. It's just a cycle. And the entropy that we experience is because of a disruption of that cycle. So given that ideal state that you can think of, then this is what would be happening. Around 6 o'clock, you'd wake up, you'd brush your teeth, clean your tongue, drink a warm water to encourage elimination, because elimination is perfect at this time. Empty your bowels and bladder, massage your body with oil, bathe, your exercise, yoga postures, meditation, eat breakfast, mid-morning walk. This is your activity from 6 to 8 in the morning, ideally. And around noon to 1 p.m., have your lunch, which would be the most important meal of the day. You'd sit quietly for 5 minutes after eating to let that be digested. Walk a little bit, and meditation late afternoon, preferably around 4:30, but definitely before sunset. And then dinner early, in the early phase of the kapha cycle, so you don't want to catch it too late. And bedtime around 10:30. That's the ideal situation. Now, people say, well, I can't do it. And the answer to that is, so be it. You can't do it. But this is what nature is telling us to do. Okay? And what it really requires is listening to your body. After a while, it becomes natural. And then because you feel so good, then you can use the law of least effort, which is do less and accomplish more. And if you're in pure spirit, then the law of least effort says do nothing and accomplish everything. That's how the spirit works. It does nothing and accomplishes everything. Thank you very much.
We've talked throughout this course on the healing value of touch. And the more that I learn, actually I just did a literature search on massages. I think there was 140 references in the last 3 years in the Medline on touch. And Dr. Fields at the University of Miami is really kind of leading this charge. She's a nurse in a prenatal intensive care unit, or was. She's now, I think, a professor. Does anybody know Dr. Fields? And so she did the original study years ago, taking these preemies, massaging them for a few minutes, and showing that they gained weight faster and they were able to be discharged from the neonatal intensive care unit sooner. Subsequently, she's done more studies in a whole range of conditions. So babies who are coming from cocaine-addicted moms do much better if they're massaged regularly in the first few days after birth. Babies coming from moms who have HIV infection seem to do much better than others. There's really a tremendous amount of literature now on the healing value of massage. You can show changes in immune function within just a few minutes, increases in natural killer cell activity, changes in the ratio of the T-cell subsets. You can show that if you take people who are in a high-stress job, like air traffic controllers, where their blood pressure is high and their stress hormones are high, and you give them 15-minute breaks where you just have someone gently massaging their shoulders, their blood pressure comes down, their stress hormones come down, and their performance substantially is enhanced for the rest of the day because they're not functioning from that state of fight or flight all the time. So it's really good to be touched and to touch other people. This researcher, I think he was an anthropologist, wanted to see how often people touched each other. And so he sat around. It was a great job. I wish I could get a grant like this. Sat around in cafes around the world watching. And in Latin America, people touched each other a lot. In fact, they don't stop touching each other. And you can walk down the streets of Bogota or any place in Venezuela, and women will be walking arm in arm with women. Men will be walking. It's just that constant touching is considered part of the culture. In the United States, it turns out that people only really touch each other twice. They shake hands usually when they meet, then they don't touch at all during the time that they're together, and then they may shake hands again when they leave. If you go to England, it turns out people never touch each other, which is why the population in Great Britain seems to be steadily falling. We have all this ambivalence about touch because we're concerned about touch leading to sexuality. But, if we really touched people as if they were our family members, our children, our brothers, our sisters, it would really do a lot to create that connectedness. When people are really in that state of vata aggravation, it's as if you forget you have a body. Your mind is just taking over everything. And so that grounding effect of a massage is really a great way to put things back into perspective. So it certainly pacifies vata, improves circulation. You can see when you're feeling kind of drowsy, it may actually put you to sleep for a few minutes, but it's almost like a very deep meditation, and you'll come out of it feeling very refreshed. It loosens toxins, and we'll talk about the whole panchakarma process later today. It softens the skin, improves digestion, and increasingly now there's really good data to show that it has lasting benefits on our immune system. Now, of course, in Ayurveda, we've classified everything in terms of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, including the oils that you can use for a massage. In general, if you're a Vata type, massage should be fairly gentle. And the oil that you want to use should be warm and rich. So the best massage oil for people with Vata is sesame. Sesame is probably the best for everybody, but sesame is a little bit heating. So people who have a Pitta constitution sometimes get a little bit overheated by the sesame, which is expressed as some irritation on the skin. But Vatas generally do very well with sesame oil. Almond is a second excellent oil for Vatas. Pittas do better with a cooling oil, and the ones that are said to be cooling in Ayurveda are coconut, olive, and sunflower. So if you're a strong Pitta, you can do a massage using what's considered to be a cooling oil. Kaphas in general, you're a little concerned about adding all that oil because they're already kapha, and oil is unctuous and heavy. But kaphas do best with either heating oils or lighter oils. So the heating oils are sesame. Mustard seed oil is actually a good oil for people who are kapha types. Or the very light oils, like safflower is said to be a lighter oil. Kaphas also do well with a dry massage, which stimulates the circulation but doesn't add that amount of oil. And then you can use aromas to add that additional level of sensory stimulation. Vatas, again, do best with aromas that are calming, warm, heavier. The most pacifying Vata aroma is probably vanilla. It just has that warm, sweet heaviness to it. But most of the floral and fruity fragrances are Vata pacifying, except for jasmine, which is a little bit cooling and more kind of elevating. Pittas do very well with, again, the floral, sweet floral fragrances. Particularly jasmine is very good for Pittas. Sandalwood is very good for Pittas. Rose is very good for Pittas. And then Kaphas do best with kind of the more spicy fragrances. So cinnamon, eucalyptus, sage, basil, slightly more medicinal or herby smells are good for Kaphas. But more importantly than anything is that you choose something that you like. In Ayurveda, one of the most important things for good general health is to perform a daily massage on yourself. And it's recommended that you do this before you take your bath or your shower. So it's a nice ritual. It can take 10, 15 minutes if you have the time. It can take about 10 or 15 seconds if you don't. It's really a great thing to add to your day. What you want to do is you get the oil that you're going to be using and get one of these little plastic squeegee bottles with the flip tops on it so you don't have the glass bottle in your bathroom. And then just heat it up under the hot running water or fill up your sink partway with hot water. Get it so it's a little bit warmer than room temperature. It's good to lay yourself out a towel that you consider to be your abhyanga. Abhyanga is the Sanskrit word for self-massage, or actually it's for applying oil. So use one towel because it does tend to saturate the towel, and then you don't have all your towels smelling like sesame oil. But find one towel, and then you heat up the oil, and you just use a little bit of it. You're not going to be covering yourself with this type of a massage. It's just enough to get the skin lubricated with the oil. So let's do it together because it's actually fun and it'll wake us up. So we're pretending that we have this oil. Put a little bit of oil, and then you'll start by just as if you're shampooing your head. So using mainly the flat parts of your hand, a little bit of your fingers, just rub it through your scalp. Then move to your forehead and just move the oil into your forehead. Then the rest of your face. And then spend some extra time on your ears. And Ayurveda describes these points known as marma points, which are these junction points between consciousness and matter. And there are a lot of them in the ear. In fact, most of the acupuncture points are actually derived from these marma points. Spend a little time on your neck and the back of your neck. And then over your chest, gently rub in circular motions over your chest. Up and down over the sternum. And then circular over the abdomen. It's a great thing to do when your children have tummy aches. Just get a little bit of warm oil and just rub their belly in a clockwise direction. Then, as best as you can, go up and down over your spine. This is when it really helps to have a partner. Okay. Then, over the limbs, you want to make circular motions over the joints, and then back and forth motions over the long bones. Circular over the elbow, back and forth over the forearm, circular over the wrist, and then spend some time on your hands, going through your palms and your fingers. Okay. And then same thing with your other side, circular over the shoulder, back and forth over the upper arm, circular over the elbow, back and forth over the forearm, circular over the wrist, and then spend some time on your palms and fingers. And then the same thing with your legs. So it's circular over the hips, back and forth over the upper leg, circular over the knee, back and forth over the lower leg, circular over the ankle. And then I would encourage you to take off your shoes and spend a little time on your feet. Now, the recommended procedure for the sole of the foot is this kind of back and forth motion. So it's back and forth motion. And then spend extra time on the toes and between the toes. Okay? And then the same thing on the other side. Circular over the hip, back and forth over the leg, circular over the knee, back and forth over the foreleg, circular over the ankle, and spend some time on the soles of your foot and your toes. Even moving fairly slowly, it takes less than 5 minutes. If you can leave the oil on, it's the best because it'll absorb quickly into the skin, provides a protective layer, it pacifies vata. So then when you take your shower, use some light soap, like a glycerin soap, like a Neutrogena or some other type of mild soap, and then enjoy your day. Now, if you don't even have time for that, then because the head and the feet are the most important in terms of pacifying the vata, then it's recommended that you at least do the scalp massage, ears, face, and your feet. So you can really do that in 1 minute. So there's no excuse to not do a daily oil massage. I really would encourage you to do it today or tomorrow morning before you take your shower. Just try it once with full oil and just see how you feel. It really makes a difference. It's great to do as a family on a Sunday morning where everyone does a massage together, and it's a great ritual that really will start your day off great. Now, if you have trouble sleeping, you can do this before bed. So the recommended procedure is first make yourself a nice warm bath, and you can put in some vata pacifying herbs into the bath as well, or vata pacifying aromas. Then do a nice slow gentle massage, take a warm bath, then either drink a cup of vata pacifying tea or make yourself a cup of warm milk with some cardamom and nutmeg in it, and then get into bed. And you'll see that this whole procedure, quieting down the vata through the touch, through the warm bath, through the milk, all that will just get you to sleep. Everyone want to take a nap right now just thinking about it? Okay. So, touch often, touch sensitively. It's what connects us. Use it regularly. You'll see it really makes a difference. It's one of the most nurturing things we can do.
This last session, I thought we'll look at the next frontier as far as the evolution of consciousness-based medicine is concerned, and look at what's beyond that frontier as well. So in this session, I intend to talk about two specific things The first is human aging, biological aging, as we are beginning to understand it. And then I also want to talk about what happens as we begin to unfold the full potential of consciousness. And is there a map for looking at that? So I want to discuss both those things, and they're in a sense interrelated. Human aging, unlike the aging of other animals, is not a fixed thing. The aging of animals is very predictable, and there are all kinds of theories about what results. Why does a tortoise live 180 years and aardvark 23 years and frog 16 years? But none of these theories really are fully satisfying, because the fact still remains that the aging of animals is very fixed. And in humans, the aging response is extremely fluid. Human aging accelerates for sure when you're under stress. Human aging accelerates when somebody has a prolonged period of grief or bereavement. There are instances of people biologically aging in a very short time. Human aging is known to slow down if you're in love, for example. But the most interesting thing about human aging is that it is also reversible biologically. And I want to talk about that a little bit in a few moments. If you look at the history of how humans have aged in our civilization, they've come across some very interesting statistics. In the Roman Empire, the average age of a human being was 28 years. So when Caesar died at the age of 31 or 32, he was a really old man. In the early part of this century, the average age in the United States was 49 years. And when the founding fathers of this country wrote the Constitution, they were old people in their mid-30s. And today, the average age in the United States, in Japan, in Western Europe, and also the developing nations of the world, the average age is about close to 80, a little longer for women than for men. What is even more remarkable is that the number of people growing older and at the same time maintaining biological youth is increasing. The fastest growing segment of the American population today is over the age of 90. The fastest rate of growth in the population is people over the age of 90. So definitely there's something happening in society where expectations of what happens with aging are changing. And that's really a very important thing to know. Expectations influence outcome. So the first studies on human biological age were done by a physician from the Massachusetts General Hospital, a physician called Alexander Leaf. He was a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. And towards the end of his career, he actually decided to go all over the world to look at how people aged in different parts of the world. And he found that there were certain parts of the world where there were people who were living to extraordinarily old ages. So amongst these were the state of Georgia in Russia, in the Soviet Union at that time, where he found a lot of centenarians. He discovered a lot of people in the age group of 105 to 115. And he was very puzzled by this group of people in Abkhazia and in Georgia, because a lot of them were actually smokers at the age of 104, 105. They would work in the fields at the age of 90, 100, horseback riding, swimming in ice-cold streams, in snowy mountains, etc. He also found the same phenomenon in certain parts of Afghanistan, and also found the same phenomenon in certain parts of the Hindu Kush Mountains. And of course, in Mexico, there's a group of Indians known as the Tarahumara Indians that not only age in a completely different way, but there is a tradition amongst the Tarahumara Indians of marathon running. And their collective belief system is that as you grow older, you become better at running. So the 60-year-olds are faster runners and have more endurance than the 20-year-olds. That's part of their tradition. In fact, that's how they send messages, or used to send messages from one Indian chief to another. Expectation influences outcome. Dr. Leaf wanted to find the common ingredient in all these different population groups. And he could not find anything that was common in their diet. For example, the diet of people in Alaska, by our standards, is extremely unhealthy, of the Indians in Alaska. Most of the time they eat whale blubber. And yet, if you put them on a vegetarian diet, then their cholesterol goes up, they get rotten teeth and heart attacks, because they have adapted to their environment over millennia. So he couldn't find a common factor in their diet. He couldn't find a common factor in the climate. He couldn't find a common factor in anything except one thing. And that was the collective belief system of these people. In Abkhazia, for example, the collective belief system is that as you grow older, you get better. That as you grow elder, you become wiser. That as you grow older, you become more glamorous. So, in fact, one of the problems Dr. Leaf had when he was doing his studies was that he never really knew how old these people were, because every time he asked them their age, they exaggerated it. Because it was fashionable to be older. So they would always exaggerate it, he says, which is quite the reverse of what people do in other parts of the world. His thesis, therefore, was that the collective belief system, or the collective consciousness, if you will, influences the individual expectation. And Nietzsche once said, even though we think that we think, even though we believe that we are thinking all the time, most of the time we are being thought by the collective mind. Our individual thoughts are context-bound. They come out not randomly, but out of a context of cultural expectations and social expectations, our racial history, our religious indoctrination, our whole worldview influences every single thought that you have. And if your collective expectation, therefore, is that by age 65 we have to retire, and then shortly after that we have to go to Florida, and shortly after that we have to languish in a nursing home, then that will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. To alter the epidemiology of aging, which has influenced the aging on a collective level, then you have to really begin to educate people that human aging is extremely flexible, and that there are examples of people who are achieving an advanced degree of chronological age, but at the same time maintaining a youthful biological age, then there must be a mechanism for it. And if there is a mechanism for it, then we can all learn about it. George Bernard Shaw, who is a great example actually of graceful aging. Throughout history there have been people like that. Bernard Shaw, Tolstoy, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Picasso made great contributions to humanity in their 8th and 9th decades. So one of his famous quotes is, George Bernard Shaw says, "Youth, oh what a pity to waste it on the young." So there is now, with what we know about aging, the first time the ability to create a situation where you have both the wisdom of experience as well as the biology of youth. Because human aging is definitely flexible, fluid enough even to be reversible. I think we want to, when defining aging, we want to be familiar with certain terms. There is chronological age, which is the age on your birth certificate and your social security card. There is psychological age, which is, of course, how young or old you feel psychologically. There are ways to measure that. There is biological age, which is if somebody had no idea about how old you were, but they were to do certain tests, what would they say how old you are? Because you can be emotionally and spiritually and physically burnt out, and you can be chronologically 25, but you can have a biological age of an old man. On the other hand, you can be chronologically 60 or 70, and you can have the biological age of a 25-year-old. So don't confuse chronological age with biological age. And obviously, biological age is the more important marker of aging. It tells you exactly how your physiology is performing. And then, of course, there's this whole realm of spiritual age, which is essentially timeless. It's eternal. So let's look at how scientists actually would measure somebody's biological age. These are the 10 biomarkers of aging. These are the 10 biomarkers of aging. And now we can add a few more to this. Let's go over these first, and then I'll tell you what the others are. So the first way to measure somebody's age is to measure their bone density. As people grow older, their bones become thinner, and a condition starts called osteoporosis. And in fact, there are technologies such as X-ray densitometry through which you can accurately predict a person's biological age just by measuring their bone density. The second measure of biological age is body temperature regulation. How flexible is their ability to regulate their body temperature? The body temperature usually remains within a very narrow range, from 98.4 degrees to about 99 in that range. And how adaptable is that ability to environments? So older people usually get heat stroke very easily because their body temperature regulation ability is not as good. So body temperature regulation is a good marker for biological aging. Basal metabolic rate, which means the metabolic rate when you're not doing anything, at rest. And as people grow older, their metabolic rate starts to decrease. Young people have a higher metabolic rate. So, of course, if you measured lots of people's basal metabolic rate, you might get different metabolic rates depending on their thyroid activity, depending on whether they are vata or pitta or kapha. We're not talking about that. We're talking about their basal metabolic rate at different ages. So whatever their basal metabolic rate is, as people grow older, it starts to fall. Sugar tolerance, which means how easily do you metabolize sugar. If you metabolize sugar very fast, that's usually a sign of youthfulness. As people grow older, they get insulin deficiency, insulin resistance. There are some changes in the secretion of growth hormone. In fact, growth hormone is decreased as people grow older. And growth hormone happens to be an insulin antagonist. And for a variety of complex reasons, what happens is, as people grow older, they don't metabolize carbohydrate as well. They don't metabolize sugar as well, and they get what is called sugar intolerance, and of course, more likely to get type 2 diabetes as well. So that's another. You can do a glucose tolerance test, which is inject sugar and watch it over several hours, and you can also predict or calculate biological age. Strength of muscles. As people grow older, the muscles strength gets weaker, as fat content in the body. People grow older, the relationship of fat to muscle, the ratio of fat to muscle also decreases. Aerobic capacity, which is your ability to utilize oxygen, that decreases as people grow old. Cholesterol, HDL ratios. So you know that there are two kinds of cholesterol, HDL, high-density lipoprotein, and low-density lipoprotein. So low LDL, the low-density lipoprotein, is the so-called bad cholesterol, and HDL is the so-called good cholesterol. As people grow older, the HDL cholesterol ratio starts to go down, which means HDL starts to decrease and the bad cholesterol starts to go up. Muscle mass, which is separate from muscle strength, blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, in fact, increases by about 10 points for every decade of life after 50. So these are very standard, well-known biomarkers of the aging process. And there are three more I should mention. Actually, there are several more, but a few that are important. Vision. As people grow older, their vision gets worse. Sex hormone levels, particularly a precursor of testosterone, the male hormone, and the female hormone estrogen, the precursor that's called DHEA sulfate, which is short for dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate. It's an adrenal steroid that is metabolized into testosterone. And as people grow older, their DHEA levels start to fall. In younger people, the DHEA levels are higher. So vision, sex hormones levels, sexual activity as well, DHEA levels, and other things can be also measured. Things like immune function. Immune function starts to fall as people grow older. And there are some very easy, non-invasive things to do that can measure immune function. You can measure IgA levels in the saliva. IgA is a secretory immunoglobulin, part of the immune system. Skin thickness decreases. And of course, what people notice most is the wrinkles, which is a result of decreasing skin thickness and a change in the elasticity or collagen in the skin. These are the standard biomarkers of aging. And I got interested in looking at the literature on this and actually pursuing some research on this shortly after my own personal interest in meditation in the 1980s. But before I get into that, in the 1980s, about 1986 I think it was, there was a very interesting study that was published by Ellen Langer from Harvard University. Ellen Langer is a psychologist at Harvard. And she's actually a full professor now of psychology at Harvard University. At that time, she was a young scientist, but she made headlines. She also wrote a book called Mindfulness at that time. And she had been influenced by Dr. Alexander Leaf's studies in Abkhazia and Russia. And in the 80s, she did an experiment that was published in many journals and actually caught a lot of attention. And she called this a time experiment. And what she did was she advertised in the Boston Globe that she wanted 100 participants to participate in a time experiment. And she got the 100 participants. They were all over the age of 80. Every single volunteer was over the age of 80. She put them in a bus and she took them to a monastery about 25 miles outside of Boston. And in that monastery, she created an environment from the 1950s. So Elvis Presley rock and roll music, Chevy Impalas parked outside, Alfred Hitchcock movies, Walter Cronkite reading the news. He looked young and had pimples on his face. And she said to them, be as you were in the 50s. In fact, they wore name tags but along with the name tags, they had photographs of themselves from 30 years previously. And they were asked to identify themselves not by looking at each other first, but by looking at the photograph from 30 years ago. So that was their method of identifying each other. And then she followed them for only 3 weeks. And guess what? Every single biomarker that she measured over 3 weeks had reversed. Every single biomarker that she measured had reversed. And not just a little, but significantly. In 3 weeks by 3 years, which means that's a huge reversal in the biomarkers of aging in a short period of time. She brought them back to Boston, and of course, as soon as they came back to Boston, they started going back in the other direction. And the reason I mention this study, and it fascinates me, is not because I think we should all go to a monastery and pretend we're living in the 50s, but because it raises a very crucial, really crucial question. And that question is, what is reality? What is reality? And perhaps what we call everyday reality is nothing other than a socially programmed hypnosis in which we're all collectively caught up. What we call everyday reality is a socially programmed hypnosis. And from time to time, people have broken out of that socially programmed hypnosis. It's been a motley collection of sages and psychotics and geniuses. Sometimes go to a psychiatric ward, as I've done through my training. Go to a psychiatric ward, and I'm not joking, and you'll see very different expressions of biological age depending on the kind of psychosis that people have. Because psychosis is a reality. It just happens to be an isolated reality and not part of the collective reality. If we are all having a collective psychosis, then we assume it's reality. It happened in Germany when the Holocaust took place. A whole collective psyche became psychotic, but nobody thought, at least while in it, that there was anything abnormal about it. There's an interesting thing about these altered states of consciousness. In medical school, when we learned about neurosis, we were told a neurotic is a person who builds castles in the air, and a psychotic is one who lives in them. And maybe, it's an important thing to ask ourselves, are we part of a psychosis of the collective mind? That what we call normal is the psychopathology of the average, which we take for granted? It's really, unless we ask ourselves that, we will not be breaking out of the hypnosis of our own conditioning. And that's the whole goal of everything you've learned this week, is to start a process of self-awareness which allows us to become independent of the collective mind and ultimately to reach a critical mass of self-awareness so the collective mind itself transforms. Because unless the collective mind transforms, our individual thoughts being context-bound, we are not going to really have a change, a real dramatic change in our biological function. Because we are influenced by that. And Ayurveda, in fact, in Vedic science, the history of humanity is divided into 4 distinct yugas or eons of time. And there are some references to that in the biblical literature as well. So a span of time where the critical mass is more or less enlightened. And if the critical mass is more or less enlightened, then everybody is living for 1,000 years. It's called Satyug in Vedic literature. And the extreme opposite of that is where the critical mass is in the stage of extreme ignorance. And it's presumably what we're in now. And where the average lifespan is less than 100, and then there are phases in between. and the pendulum kind of swings between one eon of time, another eon of time. And there are references to that in biblical literature as well. From a purely scientific perspective, though, I think one can say that our consciousness, because it transforms itself into our biology, is the critical element in the human aging process. Now, having said that, let's go over these biomarkers. I mentioned to you Ellen Langer's study. Well, there was another study in the 1980s, which was not a psychological intervention at all. And this study was from Tufts University. And this study actually took people between the ages of 84 and 96. So the youngest person in the Tufts University study was 84, and the oldest was 96. They started with 84-year-old people, 84 years young people, I should say, and they started with weight training slowly, and then introduced aerobic exercise. And in 6 months of first very gradual progressive increase in exercise, physical exercise, both aerobics and weight training, in 6 months, these people between the ages of 84 and 96, they were biologically, as measured by these biomarkers, in their 50s and 60s. They could lift more weight, they had more stamina, they had more mental alertness, they had more creativity, they had more vitality, they had more enthusiasm for life than people in their 50s and 60s. Remarkable study, absolutely. So since then, of course, there's the Cooper Institute in the South, and there's the Tufts University group. There are many studies going on now on how far can you carry this. I mean, if you start earlier, would it have more dramatic effects? Intuitively, it makes sense. Physical activity, both weight training, and what weight training does is it increases your basal metabolic rate, it increases your aerobic capacity. These are direct effects of exercise and weight training. It increases bone density, it increases muscle mass, it increases strength of muscle. So there are direct effects of all of this, and it increases DHEA levels as well by itself. So that was another very remarkable piece of data. The third piece of data came also in the 1980s, and this was on a group of people practicing meditation. It was done by Keith Wallace, who is a PhD, and in fact did the first study on the physiology of meditation in 1970. It was associated and has been associated with Maharishi, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought meditation to the West, literally in a huge way, starting in the 60s. So Keith Wallace and Benson, who is a Harvard physician, did this landmark study in 1970, which was published in the journal Science. And it was on the physiology of meditation, and where he described meditation. But subsequently, they did a study where they took meditators, people who'd been practicing meditation twice a day regularly for 5 years, and compared them with people in the control population who were not meditating. And at 5 years, the difference in biological age in the same chronological group was 12 years. So people who had been meditating regularly for 5 years had a biological age 12 years younger than their chronological age. You say, how is that possible? Well, that is possible because of all the metabolic effects of the meditative process, and particularly the metabolic effects on hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, prolactin, growth hormone. All these hormones are influenced by meditation. In the mid-80s, I got involved in a study with Dr. Glazer, who used to be a colleague of mine. So what we did, we started measuring DHEA levels in people who regularly practice meditation. DHEA is the adrenal steroid. That's the precursor of the male and female hormones. And we followed people for 5 years, regular meditation. We found that with every year there was an incremental increase in DHEA in the people who were meditating, and there was a corresponding decrease in people who are not. So meditation directly affects DHEA levels in your body. DHEA being an anti-aging hormone. There are other studies that show that growth hormone and growth factors really influence how people age. So in youth, when we are children, we have huge spurts of growth hormone. It's the hormone that's responsible for growth. But adults also secrete growth hormone. And in adults, the function of growth hormone is that it's an anabolic hormone. It takes all forms of energy and stores them in your system. And as people grow older, first of all, the surges of growth hormone decrease, but also growth hormone levels also decrease. So about 1985 or so, there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this study was about people all in their 80s who were actually given growth hormone injections, human growth hormone, which is now easily available and can be synthesized through biotechnology. So these people were all given growth hormone injections for a period of about 6 months. And the New England Journal of Medicine was a leading article on the biological reversibility of the human aging process with the administration of growth hormone. And lots of things were measured, including, in this case, wrinkles. You have these pictures of people who are in the 80s, and then you look at them and they look like they're 40 or 50, and they keep getting the growth hormone injection, and their face keeps changing. And so this became a very controversial study because obviously people want to start using growth hormone, and the FDA had its own precautions about this because not much was known. And surely, as these people continued to receive growth hormone, they developed other problems. Acromegaly, which is an endocrine problem. They developed diabetes. They developed congestive heart failure, something called cardiomyopathy, which is a condition of the heart. They even had an increased incidence of cancer. So growth hormone therapy for its anti-aging effects was discarded in the United States. But if you are from Europe, then I can tell you that there are clinics today in Switzerland and in parts of France where people still go for growth hormone rejuvenative therapy. And it's given under controlled conditions. What's my opinion about that? I think it's highly dangerous. You can probably never predict what's going to happen if you give an excessive amount of growth hormone, and it's going to probably create monsters in the future if it is continued. But because of this data, we also got interested, and my colleagues and some of us who are interested in this started measuring growth factors and growth hormone after massage. And of course, growth hormone goes up very dramatically after a massage, in adults as well as in children. In children, of course, also it goes up. If you massage a baby every day, it will grow twice as fast, given the same diet in the early formative years. Same diet, because of the secretion of growth factors and growth hormone. So I think massage has rejuvenative effects, undoubtedly, not only because of the secretion of growth hormone, but also because of the absorption of free radical scavengers, and especially if you use antioxidants in the massage oil, if you use herbal supplements in the massage oil, there's a huge amount of transdermal absorption, which affects not only growth hormone levels, but the antioxidant effects. So therefore, there's another strategy to anti-aging, and that is nutritional supplements. What are the nutritional supplements that definitely alter biological markers of aging? Antioxidants. The research is on antioxidants. So vitamin C, A, E are antioxidants. And they definitely affect the biomarkers of aging. Now, we started to look at the herbal supplements in the Ayurvedic literature. And of all of those, the one that's supposed to be the most effective is amlaki, the Indian gooseberry, Embellia myrabolum. This is the most powerful antioxidant known, more than any vitamin C that you can take, because it comes in a very special way, packaged by Mother Nature. The receptors in the body recognize it, and the way it's made is with ghee, which is clarified butter. And you would say, my God, clarified butter, what's that going to do to my cholesterol? Well, first of all, there's very little of it. Secondly, it turns out that our receptors that bind to these antioxidants in the body are lipid receptors, which means they're made of little molecules of fat. So actually, the clarified butter, which is used to prepare this biochavan, it helps the absorption of this nutrient. There are many good studies worldwide on the effects of this antioxidant effects, anti-carcinogenic effects, anti-arthritic effects, and basically rejuvenative effects. So if I was to summarize all the strategies for aging, I would say they are as follows. The ones that I mentioned. Change your expectation about aging. Get enough exercise to really make a difference in your muscle mass, in your muscle strength, in your bone density. And you have to go about doing that gradually, but really put attention on increasing muscle mass, bone density, and muscle strength. Everything else will be taken care of if you do that. Third, meditate every day, regularly, consistently. Once a day is not good enough. It's like, taking one aspirin, it doesn't get rid of the headache. You have to take 2. And you don't need to take 3. You might get an ulcer. So you don't need to meditate more than twice a day also. You don't want to feel like a zombie. Just the right dose. And fourth, take nutritional supplements, either herbal or other antioxidants. Now, recently there's a whole body of literature on DHEA as a supplement. And there's a whole body of literature that's saying that DHEA, in fact, alters biological aging. There's some literature that is emerging on melatonin. And all I can say to you is it looks good. But I can't say that the scientific data at the moment says definitely this is going to work. But subsequently, they did a study where they took meditators, people who'd been practicing meditation twice a day regularly, for 5 years, and compared them with people in the control population who were not meditating. And at 5 years, the difference in biological age in the same chronological group was 12 years. So people who had been meditating regularly for 5 years had a biological age 12 years younger than their chronological age. You say, how is that possible? Well, that is possible because of all the metabolic effects of the meditative process, and particularly the metabolic effects on hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, prolactin, growth hormone. All these hormones are influenced by meditation. In the mid-80s, I got involved in a study with Dr. Glaser, who used to be a colleague of mine. What we did, we started measuring DHEA levels in people who regularly practice meditation. DHEA is the adrenal steroid. That's the precursor of the male and female hormones. And we followed people for 5 years, regular meditation. We found that with every year there was an incremental increase in DHEA in the people who were meditating, and there was a corresponding decrease in people who are not. So meditation directly affects DHEA levels in your body. DHEA being an anti-aging hormone. There are other studies that show that growth hormone and growth factors really influence how people age. So in youth, when we are children, we have huge spurts of growth hormone. It's the hormone that's responsible for growth. But adults also secrete growth hormone. And in adults, the function of growth hormone is that it's an anabolic hormone. It takes all forms of energy and stores them in your system. And as people grow older, first of all, the surges of growth hormone decrease, but also growth hormone levels also decrease. So about 1985 or so, there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine. And this study was about people all in their 80s who were actually given growth hormone injections, human growth hormone, which is now easily available and can be synthesized through biotechnology. So these people were all given growth hormone injections for a period of about 6 months. And the New England Journal of Medicine was a leading article on the biological reversibility of the human aging process with the administration of growth hormone. And lots of things were measured, including, in this case, wrinkles. So you have these pictures of people who are in their 80s, and then you look at them and they look like they're 40 or 50, and they keep getting the growth hormone injection, and their face keeps changing. And so this became a very controversial study because obviously people want to start using growth hormone, and the FDA had its own precautions about this because not much was known. And surely, as these people continued to receive growth hormone, they developed other problems. Acromegaly, which is an endocrine problem. They developed diabetes. They developed congestive heart failure, something called cardiomyopathy, which is a condition of the heart. They even had an increased incidence of cancer. So growth hormone therapy for its anti-aging effects was discarded in the United States. But if you are from Europe, then I can tell you that there are clinics today in Switzerland and in parts of France where people still go for growth hormone rejuvenative therapy. And it's given under controlled conditions. What's my opinion about that? I think it's highly dangerous. You can probably never predict what's going to happen if you give an excessive amount of growth hormone, and it's going to probably create monsters in the future if it is continued. But because of this data, we also got interested, and my colleagues and some of us who are interested in this started measuring growth factors and growth hormone after massage. And of course, growth hormone goes up very dramatically after a massage, in adults as well as in children. In children, of course, also it grows up. If you massage a baby every day, it will grow twice as fast, given the same diet in the early formative years. Same diet, because of the secretion of growth factors and growth hormone. So I think massage has rejuvenative effects, undoubtedly, not only because of the secretion of growth hormone, but also because of the absorption of free radical scavengers, and especially if you use antioxidants in the massage oil, if you use herbal supplements in the massage oil, there's a huge amount of transdermal absorption, which affects not only growth hormone levels, but the antioxidant effects. So therefore, there's another strategy to anti-aging, and that is nutritional supplements. What are the nutritional supplements that definitely alter biological markers of aging? Antioxidants. The research is on antioxidants. So vitamin C, A, E are antioxidants. And they definitely affect the biomarkers of aging. Now, we started to look at the herbal supplements in the Ayurvedic literature. And of all of those, the one that's supposed to be the most effective is amlaki, the Indian gooseberry, Embellia myrabolum. This is the most powerful antioxidant known, more than any vitamin C that you can take, because it comes in a very special way, packaged by Mother Nature. The receptors in the body recognize it, and the way it's made is with ghee, which is clarified butter. And you would say, my God, clarified butter, what's that going to do to my cholesterol? Well, first of all, there's very little of it. Secondly, it turns out that our receptors that bind to these antioxidants in the body are lipid receptors, which means they're made of little molecules of fat. So actually, the clarified butter, which is used to prepare this biochavan, it helps the absorption of this nutrient. There are many good studies worldwide on the effects of this antioxidant effect, anti-carcinogenic effects, anti-arthritic effects, and basically rejuvenative effects. So if I was to summarize all the strategies for aging, I would say they are as follows. The ones that I mentioned. Change your expectation about aging. Get enough exercise to really make a difference in your muscle mass, in your muscle strength, in your bone density. And you have to go about doing that gradually, but really put attention on increasing muscle mass, bone density, and muscle strength. Everything else will be taken care of if you do that. Third, meditate every day, regularly, consistently. Once a day is not good enough. It's like, taking one aspirin, it doesn't get rid of the headache. You have to take 2. And you don't need to take 3. You might get an ulcer. So you don't need to meditate more than twice a day also. You don't want to feel like a zombie. Just the right dose. And fourth, take nutritional supplements, either herbal or other antioxidants. Now, recently there's a whole body of literature on DHEA as a supplement. And there's a whole body of literature that's saying that DHEA, in fact, alters biological aging. There's some literature that is emerging on melatonin. And all I can say to you is it looks good. But I can't say that the scientific data at the moment says definitely this is going to work. Now, just want to say, how about the spiritual insight into all this? The mental attitude. And I think the mental techniques that influence aging are here. Changing your internal reference point from ego-based to spirit-based. Because time is manufactured and metabolized by the ego. The ego creates time. When ego entered our evolution, then death also entered our consciousness. Only the ego is that which dies. The spirit is the underlying ground beyond that. Present moment awareness. This is the state of awareness that creates the least amount of entropy in the physical body. Uncertainty as part of the overall order of things, or what we call the wisdom of uncertainty, which is, I accept that as my anchor, to be comfortable with uncertainty, because certainty is the prison of the past. It's the stale repetition of outworn ideas in the past. An attitude that change is the only constant and is infused with non-change, because in the midst of change, there's always the non-change of the observer. And that little exercise that we did in the midst of our observation, turning back to the observer and experiencing the observer as the non-changing factor in the midst of time-bound change. The observer is the timeless factor in the midst of time-bound change. And the knowledge that entropy is a function in the universe, but it holds no threat if it is under the control of the infinite organizing power of spirit. Again, changing your reference point back to spirit all the time. So a few years ago, with all that, I came about with these ideas that I want you to go home with, which in a way capture the essence of all the Ayurvedic techniques that you've learned this week. First, listening to the body's wisdom. The body sends out only 2 signals. Signal of comfort and a signal of discomfort. So all behavior should be such that it, in a sense, always creates that experience of comfort. I'm not talking now about physical intense exercise, which is a part of the routine. I'm talking about generally the behaviors that create emotional comfort more than anything else. Listening to the body's emotions means listening to the wisdom of the body. Maintaining life-centered, present moment awareness. This moment is as it should be. The past is gone, the future is not here. At this moment, I'm free of both. That notion that this is the only moment, that really is. The past is an imagination. The future is also an imagination. The only reality is this moment. The experience of silence. Talked about that. Relinquishing the need for approval and control. The need for approval and control are ego-based needs that are based on fear, and all motivation based on fear creates entropy. Practicing defenselessness, which means relinquishing the need to defend a point of view. It doesn't mean that you don't have a point of view. It just means you don't have the need to defend it anymore. It's part of the law of least effort. Do less and accomplish more, because 99.9% of our energy is expended in proving that we are right, in defending our need to be right. So give up being right, totally and completely. That's what defenselessness is. Now, I had the good fortune to speak on this a few years ago at Mr. Gorbachev's World Forum in San Francisco. I spent the whole evening talking about the law of least effort. At the end of the talk, Mr. Gorbachev came to me and he said, I understand this principle very well. I practiced it on Mr. Bush a few years ago. So I said, what happened? He said, at the height of the Cold War, during a summit, I went to him and I said, George, I'm going to do something terrible to you. And he said, Bush sort of was alarmed. He said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to deprive you of an enemy. I'm going to deprive you of an enemy. We are going to become defenseless. And he says, we did that, now they pay all our bills. It's the law of least effort. So, relinquishing the need for approval, practicing defenselessness. Using the mirror of relationship. The mirror of relationship, which means every relationship is a mirror. Those that we love and those that we hate are both mirrors of the self. We are attracted to those people in whom we find traits that we want in ourselves. And we are repelled by those people in whom we find traits that we deny in ourselves. So just to ask yourself this question, why am I attracted to this person? What is it they have that I want in myself? Can I keep borrowing these traits, or should I become these traits? And also, what's repelling me? What am I denying in my own self? Using the mirror of a relationship for conscious evolution allows us to shed the burden of judgment, because you can't do it otherwise consciously. Eliminating toxins from our life. And that includes eliminating toxic people from our life. Toxic relationships, toxic emotions, toxic food, toxic chemicals, they all have the same effect. They create toxins in the body. Now you can even measure these toxins, all these hydrogen peroxide and singlet oxygen and all the things that go along in the name of radicals, hydroxy radical and so on. Replacing fear-based behavior with love-based behavior, that means internal points of reference is shifting from ego to spirit, and a deeper understanding that only come with the evolution of consciousness, that behind the mask of matter, there is a deeper reality. And that as we explore this deeper reality, we have access to states of awareness that we never recognized we had. And these states of awareness are beyond waking, dreaming, and sleeping. I mentioned them the other day as an introduction, glimpsing the soul, cosmic consciousness, refined cosmic consciousness, or divine consciousness, and ultimately unity consciousness. And I'll just say a few words because I can only say a few things. The rest is experience, and hopefully we'll share that experience as we explore the world of spirit and consciousness together in future sessions. So the fourth state, beyond dreaming, waking, and sleeping, is glimpsing the soul. It's when we step into the gap. And during that experience, there is restful awareness, there's a heightened state of alertness, and there is the beginnings of the intuitive response, the non-linear, contextual, relational intelligence that orchestrates the infinite diversity of the universe. In this experience, which occurs, of course, through putting attention on the observer and through meditation, we have the first glimpse of a deeper reality. Beyond the fourth state of consciousness is the fifth state of consciousness, which is called cosmic state of consciousness, which creates, just like the fourth state, restful awareness, creates its own physiology, its own brainwave pattern, its own cardiac pattern, its own immune function, etc. The fifth state of consciousness does the same. The fifth state of consciousness is called cosmic consciousness. It is the simultaneity of local and non-local awareness at the same time, which means the attention is on the observer and the observed at the same time. It's also called an alert witnessing of the roles we play. So I'm playing the role of a speaker and author right now. I also play the role of a father, I play the role of a son, I play the role of a husband, I play the role of a doctor. I'm not the roles I'm playing. I'm the alert witness of the roles I'm playing. It might be my destiny to play an infinity of roles, but I'm not the roles I'm playing. So in that alert witnessing, what happens is there's a state of awareness where there is the non-judgmental awareness of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. Dreams are lucid because there's a part of you who's watching the dream. Even deep sleep has a part of you that's fully awake to the physiology of deep sleep, body and mind and brain function. Activity, there's a part of you that's caught up in activity and there's a part of you that's totally detached, which is what the spiritual traditions say, to be in this world and not of it. That's local and non-local awareness at the same time. Now in this state, if somebody were to measure your brainwaves would show the same physiology as in deep meditation, even if you were playing tennis. So it's a very interesting physiological functioning that correlates with cosmic consciousness. You're in the midst of dynamic activity, but your silent observer is not overshadowed by the observation. And your physiology reflects that. Your brainwaves reflect that. Your cardiac coherence reflects that. The electromagnetic fields around your body reflect that. That's cosmic consciousness. Here what happens is we go beyond the intuitive response into the creative response, because in fact what we start experiencing more and more are coincidences and improbabilities, the conspiracy of improbabilities. The conspiracy of improbabilities that starts to weave a meaningful incident in our lives. And that's what good luck is. It's opportunity meeting preparedness. The sixth state of consciousness, which is beyond cosmic consciousness, you can also call refined cosmic consciousness, is to have the experience of the observer in the observed, which means I'm looking at this flower, and I'm now, it's not something that you make a mood of. This is something that happens with the evolution of consciousness. Anybody can make a mood of anything. That's one of the problems with all spiritual disciplines. You don't know if somebody is lying or telling the truth. Only you know. Only you know. And if you know, then you don't even feel the need to tell anybody about it. So the sixth state of consciousness is to see the object of your observation both in its local and in its non-local nature. As I'm looking at the flower, I see the flower, but you also see the rainbow and the sunshine and the earth and the water and the wind and the void of space and the vast history of creation that brought this to where it is right now. That's going beyond the mere appearance into the underlying reality. And when you go beyond even that, then you see and cognize the same spirit. That's the sixth state of consciousness, where meaningful coincidence and synchronicity accelerates to the point where everything seems to be miraculous, because that's the experience. And finally, the state of consciousness, which is the merging of the spirit within with the merging of the spirit over there, where suddenly, because the ego is no longer the internal reference point, the environment begins to be experienced as your extended physical body. So there is the experience in awareness that the environment is not separate from me, it's my physical body. The earth is actually my physical body, and the trees are actually my lungs. Now, intellectually, that's actually true, because we're recycling the dust that makes us with the dust out there. We're recycled dirt, basically. We're recycling that. So intellectually, that's okay to know that. But I'm not talking intellectually. I'm talking about experientially, to look at the earth and the trees and experience them as my own physical being. So what Rumi says in one of his poems says, "Let the waters settle and you will see stars and moon mirrored in your being." It's a state of awareness which goes beyond the miraculous, because in fact, everything is a miracle. So that's the course of evolution, metabiological evolution, beyond biological evolution, that hopefully we're all going to collectively together explore as the years unroll, since we're going to have the wisdom of aging with the biology of youth. And if there's only one word that I can use to express all that, it would be the experience of love. Not as a sentiment, not as an emotion, but as the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. The experiential knowledge of unity consciousness. So I'd like to end this week's seminar with a quote from Rumi. He said, "The most important thing you can do is to become a passionate lover of life. And if you're a lover in life, then you'll be a lover in death, a lover in the tomb, a lover on the day of resurrection, a lover in paradise, and a lover forever." And if you're not a lover, then don't count your life as having been lived. Thank you very much.